I arrived at the Rolling Oaks Country Club just as the sun began to dip behind the manicured greens. The parking lot was a sea of luxury SUVs and black sedans with government plates. I adjusted the cuffs of my plain white blouse and took a deep breath. My brother Kyle's silver Porsche was parked right up front in a reserved spot. He always made sure everyone knew exactly where he stood in the world. I walked past it and headed toward the grand ballroom. The air inside was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and heavy cologne. My father, Richard Sterling, was standing in the center of a circle of silver-haired men. He wore his dress blues with the pride of a man who believed his rank was his soul. Every metal on his chest caught the light as he gestured wildly with a drink in his hand. He was telling a story about the time he commanded a destroyer in the Gulf. It was a story I had heard at least 100 times since I was 10 years old. I tried to slip toward the bar without being noticed. I just wanted a soda and a quiet corner until I could make a polite exit. But my father had the eyes of a hawk when it came to finding a target for his jokes. He spotted me from across the room, and his face lit up with a mischievous grin. I knew that look far too well. It was the same one he gave right before he embarrassed me at my high school graduation. "There she is," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The group of officers turned their heads toward me like a synchronized unit. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as I stopped in my tracks. My father marched over and threw a heavy arm around my shoulders. He didn't smell like affection. He smelled like bourbon and ego. He looked at his friends and winked. "Gentlemen, meet my daughter, Morgan," he announced to the crowd. "She is the real hero of the family, the one who keeps the boxes moving." A few of the men chuckled softly. He squeezed my shoulder a bit too hard. "She works in supply chain, management for the government," he added. "While Kyle is out there breaking the sound barrier, Morgan is making sure the office has enough staples." The laughter was louder this time. I kept my face as neutral as a stone wall. I had spent years learning how to mask my emotions in high-pressure rooms. This was nothing compared to a briefing at the Pentagon. I just gave a small, polite nod to the men. One of them, a retired Navy captain, looked at me with a mix of pity and boredom. He went back to his drink without saying a word. My father leaned in closer to the group as if sharing a secret. "I told her she should have joined the Navy," he said. "But I guess someone has to be the family's professional shipper." He laughed at his own wit and patted his stomach. I felt my teeth grit together behind my forced smile. I wasn't a shipper, and I didn't deal with staples. I was the director of strategic asset recovery. My office didn't even have a sign on the door. I managed the logistics of moving things that technically didn't exist. My supply chain involved clandestine flights and unmarked crates in hostile territories. But to my father, if you weren't pulling a trigger or flying a jet, you were just the help. He saw the world in black and white, and I was just a gray background. Kyle walked up then, looking sharp in his flight suit. He had that arrogant swagger that all fighter pilots seem to develop in flight school. He high-fived our father and gave me a condescending smirk. "Hey, sis, did you finish counting all the socks today?" he asked. He didn't wait for an answer before turning to talk to a group of young ensigns. I was a footnote in my own family's history. The room suddenly went quiet as the heavy oak doors at the far end opened. A man in a crisp uniform with 3 stars on each shoulder stepped into the ballroom. It was Lieutenant General Vance. He was the guest of honor, a legend in the special operations community. Even my father stood a little straighter when he saw him. Vance walked with a limp that he earned in a place most people couldn't find on a map. Richard scrambled to greet him, nearly knocking over a waiter in the process. "General, What an absolute honor to have you here," my father gushed. He was practically vibrating with excitement. Vance gave a curt nod and shook my father's hand. He had the eyes of a man who had seen too much and said too little. He scanned the room with a practiced, tactical precision. My father didn't waste a second. He grabbed my arm and pulled me forward again. "General, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Morgan," he said. "She's our little logistics expert." He chuckled nervously, trying to bridge the gap between his rank and the general's. "Since she's so good at moving things, I'll have her get you a drink," Richard added. "Morgan, be a dear and get the general a double scotch on the rocks." I felt a flash of cold anger in my chest. He was treating me like a servant in front of the most powerful man in the room. I looked at General Vance. I knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, he knew exactly who I was. We had spoken on a secure line only 48 hours ago. I had been the one to authorize the emergency extraction of his team from a hot zone. I didn't move. I just looked Vance directly in the eyes. I saw the moment of recognition hit him. His eyebrows twitched, almost imperceptibly. My father nudged me again. "Didn't you hear me, girl?" He hissed under his breath. "Get moving and show some respect for the general." I didn't break eye contact with Vance. "I'll get that drink, General," I said, my voice calm and steady. Vance didn't look at my father. He kept his eyes on me. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. I turned and walked toward the bar. I could feel my father's frustrated gaze burning into my back. He probably thought I was being disrespectful by not rushing. I waited at the bar while the bartender poured the scotch. I opened my small clutch bag to find a mint. As I reached inside, my fingers brushed against something cold and heavy. It was the challenge coin I had received earlier that morning. It was a habit of mine to keep it close. It reminded me that my work mattered, even if no one knew about it. I grabbed the drink and turned to walk back. My brother Kyle was moping around near the center of the room. He was trying to listen in on my father's conversation with Vance. As I passed him, Kyle stepped back suddenly to gesture toward a photo on the wall. His elbow caught my arm with a sharp thud. The tray tilted dangerously in my hand. My bag slipped from under my arm and hit the floor. The contents spilled out across the polished marble. Lipstick, a phone, and some keys were scattered everywhere. But it was the heavy metallic object that made the most noise. It hit the floor with a loud, ringing chime. The sound was so distinct that it cut through the chatter of the room. The coin rolled across the floor like a spinning top. It made a rhythmic clicking sound as it lost momentum. It finally came to a stop right between General Vance's boots. The ballroom went silent. Everyone was looking at the small disc of metal on the floor. My father looked down at it and let out a snort of derision. "Morgan, for heaven's sake, pick up your trinket," he snapped. He looked at the general and shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. She's always been a bit clumsy. She probably bought that at a museum gift shop or something." Kyle started to laugh, looking around for support from his friends. "It's probably a souvenir from her supply depot," he joked. General Vance didn't laugh. He didn't even look at my father. He slowly knelt down and picked up the coin. He held it in his palm and studied it for a long moment. The silence in the room grew heavy and uncomfortable. I saw the color drain from the general's face as he turned the coin over. He stood up slowly, his movements stiff and formal. He looked at the coin, then at me, then back at the coin. My father was still rambling. "Richard, shut up," Vance said. The words weren't loud, but they had the force of a physical blow. My father's jaw actually dropped open. He looked like he had been slapped. The general stepped toward me, ignoring everyone else in the room. He held the coin out to me on his open palm. I noticed his hand was trembling just a tiny bit. "This is a Commander-in-Chief coin," he whispered. "Not just any version. This is the Shadow Spear edition." He looked at me with a level of respect I had never seen before. "There are only 5 of these in existence," he added, for the benefit of the room. My father stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. "James, what are you talking about?" he asked. "It's just a coin. Morgan works in supply. She probably found it in a desk." Vance turned on him with a look of pure ice. He looked like he wanted to court-martial my father on the spot. "Richard, you are a fool," Vance said. The general turned, back to me, and did something that shocked everyone. He snapped his heels together and offered me a sharp textbook salute. A 3-star general was saluting a woman in a plain white blouse. I saw Kyle's drink slip from his hand and shatter on the floor. My father looked like he was having a stroke. The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. "Ma'am, I didn't realize you were the one on the other end of the line," Vance said. "I owe you my life and the lives of my entire advance force. We wouldn't have made it out of that valley without your logistics." He said the word logistics with a weight that made my father's previous insults seem pathetic. "You didn't just move boxes, you moved heaven and earth." I took the coin from his hand and tucked it back into my bag. I didn't look at my father yet. "Thank you, General," I said. "We do what we have to do to bring our people home." Vance nodded solemnly. He looked at my father and then back at me. "Does he even know?" the general asked. I shook my head slowly. Vance looked at my father with utter contempt. "Your daughter isn't a shipper, Richard. She is the director of strategic asset recovery. She has a higher security clearance than I do. She is the reason your son's squadron has fuel, and the reason I am standing here tonight." Richard was pale, his eyes darting between the general and me. He tried to find his voice, but it came out as a weak wheeze. "Director?" he stammered. "Morgan? Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him and felt nothing but a cold detachment. "Because you never asked, Dad," I said. "You were too busy telling me what I wasn't, to ever care about what I was." I saw a tear well up in his eye, but I didn't care. Kyle was staring at me like I was a ghost. He looked small in his flight suit, all the bravado gone. I realized then that I had been seeking approval from people who didn't even speak my language. I didn't need their praise because I had earned my own. The general stayed by my side, making it clear where his loyalty lay. The party was effectively over for my father. He had spent the night trying to bask in the glow of high-ranking men. Now, the highest-ranking man in the room was treating his daughter like a superior. People were whispering all around us. The story would be all over the base by morning. The logistics girl was actually a shadow commander. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I decided I didn't want the scotch anymore. I turned to General Vance and gave him a polite nod. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I have a flight to catch at 4 in the morning. Some more boxes need moving," I added, with a small smile. Vance smiled back with a genuine and warm expression. "Safe travels, Director," he said. "We'll be waiting for your next move." I walked toward the exit without looking back at my family. I could hear my father calling my name, his voice sounding old and fragile. I didn't stop. I walked out into the cool night air and felt the weight of the coin in my bag. The silver Porsche was still there, but it didn't look so impressive anymore. I got into my modest sedan and started the engine. I had a mission to prep for in a few hours. A team was counting on me to be their lifeline in a place no one knew about. That was more important than any retirement gala or country club dinner. My father wanted a legacy of medals and stories. I was building a legacy of lives saved and missions accomplished. That was more than enough for me. 6 months later, I was sitting in a secure facility in the heart of Virginia. The walls were lead-lined and the air was filtered. 3 monitors in front of me showed live feeds from a drone over the Mediterranean. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my brother Kyle. He had been trying to reach out for weeks. I opened the message and read it. "Hey Morgan, I'm sorry for being such a jerk at the party," it said. "Dad hasn't been the same since that night. He retired from the board of the country club. He just sits in his den and looks at your old baby pictures." I stared at the screen for a moment. I didn't feel the old hurt or the need to fix things. I typed back a short reply. "I'm busy, Kyle," I wrote. "Tell him I'm doing fine and I'll call when I can." I put the phone down and turned back to the monitors. My team was moving into position. They were waiting for my signal to proceed. I checked the coordinates and confirmed the extraction point was clear. This was my world. My father believed that power was something you wore on your sleeve. I knew that real power was the thing that moved in the shadows and kept the world turning. He wanted me to be an assistant because he couldn't handle the idea of me being more than him. But the general knew, my team knew, and most importantly, I knew. I hit the transmit button on my console. "Shadow 1, this is logistics," I said. "You are green for go." I watched as the icons on the screen began to move in perfect synchronization. The supply chain was in motion. Lives were on the line, and I was the one holding the thread. I was exactly where I was meant to be. My father's retirement gala was the last time I saw him for a long time. He sent letters and left voicemails, all of them full of apologies and pride. But the pride felt empty now. It was based on my title, not on me. He loved the director, but he had never bothered to love the daughter. I had found a new family in the field. They were the ones who saw me when I was invisible. They were the ones who trusted me when things went sideways. We didn't need medals or parties to know our worth. We had the silence of a successful mission and the weight of a coin in our pockets. That was the only recognition that ever really mattered. I looked at the dark screen of my phone one last time before archiving the thread. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, you are not alone. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't a loud confrontation. It is simply becoming so successful that they can no longer ignore the truth. Stay quiet, do the work, and let the results speak for themselves. The world is run by the people who move the boxes. Never forget that.